In the discussion, several participants openly admitted that if they had to choose, they would rather be too skinny than too fat. This perspective stems from both personal experiences and the influence of social standards. One young woman shared that after beginning recovery from an eating disorder, she constantly reminded herself of the health benefits of gaining weight and maintaining a stronger body. Yet deep down, she still felt bound by the beauty ideals society imposes on women, where thinness is seen as the ultimate marker of attractiveness. Growing up, she often felt too big compared to her classmates, or even her own family, and that perception played a major role in leading her toward anorexia. On the other hand, an overweight man explained that carrying excess weight brings daily struggles. He described how difficult and costly it is to find clothes that fit, and how he physically feels the burden of his mass at the end of each day. For him, being too skinny seems much easier to recover from. He could simply eat properly again and regain weight. In contrast, living with obesity affects not only his health, but also his comfort and mobility. That is why he stated he would unquestionably choose to be underweight rather than overweight. Others recalled how being perceived as too big had subjected them to bullying, which pushed them toward extreme weight loss behaviors. They believed that shrinking their bodies would protect them from ridicule and help them feel accepted. Unfortunately, these stories reveal how strongly society rewards thinness through attention, validation, and praise, while often stigmatizing larger bodies. This dynamic continues to reinforce the idea that being skinny equates to being beautiful, desirable, and successful. When asked where these pressures to be thin come from, many participants pointed to constant comparison as one of the strongest factors. For individuals struggling with eating disorders, comparison often became a toxic competition. Some recalled weighing themselves with friends to see who could reach the lowest number, or even feeling a sense of victory when they weighed less than a younger sibling. In these situations, their self-worth was tied not to health or happiness, but to being smaller than those around them. Media and celebrity culture were also identified as major contributors. Reality shows, fashion magazines, and social media platforms repeatedly showcase a narrow version of beauty. Slim women with flawless bodies, and men with lean, muscular frames. For teenage girls and young adults, these images can set unrealistic expectations. One participant admitted that during her most extreme weight loss, friends would compliment her appearance by saying she looked amazing, or asking how they too could lose weight. Although her health was deteriorating, the praise she received reinforced her belief that thinner was always better. This cycle of validation makes recovery particularly difficult. Even when participants gained weight and were told they looked healthier, many struggled to interpret the compliment positively. To them, healthy sounded like bigger, and bigger was something they had been conditioned to fear. For others, bullying in school was the trigger. Being teased for looking too big convinced them that weight loss was the only path to social acceptance and popularity. Interestingly, male participants described experiencing less direct pressure to conform to strict beauty standards, but they still acknowledged the cultural double standards. Men, they argued, are often allowed more room to exist in a middle ground body type, such as the dad bod, while women are expected to either be slim or face harsh judgment. Nevertheless, even men admitted that body comparisons, whether through peers, partners, or media, still weighed heavily on their confidence. Ultimately, the discussion revealed that comparison, whether through peers or media, lies at the heart of body image struggles. From childhood teasing to celebrity culture, these constant judgments make it difficult for individuals to accept their bodies as they are, fueling the cycle of insecurity and disordered behaviors. The conversation then turned to the topic of fat shaming versus skinny shaming, and participants quickly agreed that the two experiences, while both painful, carry very different weights. Many expressed that fat shaming tends to be harsher, more persistent, and rooted in deeper cultural biases than skinny shaming. Being called fat, they explained, often feels like the worst insult possible because of how society has historically devalued larger bodies. In contrast, skinny shaming, though harmful, can sometimes be framed as a backhanded compliment. Phrases like "you're too skinny" might sting, but they are often tied to the idealized cultural preference for thinness. Several participants described how fat shaming is laced with a long and painful history. One woman brought up the theory that fat phobia originally developed alongside racism, as the beauty standard of a thin white woman became the dominant cultural ideal. In this sense, to call someone fat was not just an insult about body size, but also a way of reinforcing a narrow, exclusionary vision of beauty. Others echoed this point, noting how fat individuals are subjected to judgment at every turn, whether being mocked online, criticized at the gym, or judged for their food choices. The message, they argued, is that in society's eyes, a fat person can never win. Skinny participants, however, pushed back slightly, noting that they too have been targets of ridicule and harassment. Many said being told they looked sick, weak, or like a skeleton was deeply upsetting and could trigger feelings of insecurity. Yet even as they acknowledged the pain of skinny shaming, most agreed it lacks the same social consequences as fat shaming. In many cases, skinny bodies are still upheld as the cultural ideal, whereas fat bodies are stigmatized and dismissed. What emerged from the discussion is that both forms of shaming cause real harm, but fat shaming carries more systemic weight. It is tied to centuries of exclusionary standards and cultural narratives that equate thinness with beauty, health, and worth. Skinny shaming may bruise the ego, but fat shaming has the power to isolate, dehumanize, and strip individuals of dignity in a way that feels much more severe. A powerful theme that emerged in the discussion was the fear of gaining weight, a feeling shared by participants from both ends of the spectrum. For those recovering from anorexia, weight gain often triggered deep anxiety. One young woman explained that although she had gained 30 pounds since starting recovery, her mind still struggled to reconcile her new body with her self-image. She described it as a teeter-totter effect. While logically she knew regaining weight was healthy, emotionally it felt like a slippery slope that might push her back into restrictive behaviors. Others highlighted the role of body dysmorphia, where one's perception of their body is distorted. Participants admitted that even small increases on the scale could cause panic or nightmares. For them, the number was not just data, it symbolized failure, loss of control, and a return to the body they desperately feared. A male participant who had once weighed nearly 400 pounds shared that his terror of gaining weight was tied to past experiences. Having lived in a body that felt debilitating, he never wanted to see those numbers again. For him, each pound gained represented more than weight. It represented weakness of will and a threat to his health. Not everyone, however, described fear as the dominant emotion. Some participants who had worked through years of treatment emphasized that their mindset had shifted. They no longer felt paralyzed by the idea of gaining weight, but rather focused on progress, health, and self-acceptance. Still, they acknowledged that recovery from disordered eating is rarely permanent or linear. The fear of weight gain is something that lingers, even when managed. Ultimately, the discussion showed how fear of gaining weight is less about numbers and more about identity. It reflects years of conditioning, distorted self-perception, and emotional battles that cannot simply be erased by logic or reassurance. The next prompt challenged participants to consider whether being obese or anorexic is truly a matter of choice. This question sparked strong reactions, as many felt the two conditions could not be equated. Several agreed that obesity can, at least in part, result from lifestyle choices such as overeating, poor diet, or lack of exercise. They emphasized that what people put into their bodies is, on some level, a decision. One woman admitted that even though she knew what steps could help her improve her health, she often chose the easier or cheaper option, which led her further into obesity. However, others quickly argued that this perspective oversimplifies a deeply complex issue. They highlighted the role of genetics, metabolism, medical conditions, disabilities, and especially socioeconomic factors. For many people, access to fresh food, time for exercise, and quality healthcare are limited. Living in poverty often means relying on processed, inexpensive foods, which contributes to weight gain. In such cases, obesity cannot be dismissed as merely a choice. The conversation became even more nuanced when addressing anorexia. Most participants strongly resisted the idea that anorexia is a choice, framing it instead as a mental disorder. They explained that while the initial decision to lose weight may be voluntary, the progression into anorexia involves psychological changes that distort perception and override rational thinking. No one, they argued, deliberately sets out to develop an eating disorder. Instead, it is the result of a dangerous cycle fueled by societal pressures, trauma, and mental health vulnerabilities. Some participants drew parallels between food-related struggles and addiction. Unlike substances such as alcohol or drugs, food cannot be avoided entirely, making recovery uniquely difficult. This blurred the line between choice and compulsion, showing how both obesity and anorexia involve a mix of personal decisions, environmental influences, and uncontrollable factors. Ultimately, the group concluded that labeling either condition as purely a choice oversimplifies the reality. Obesity may involve more conscious decisions than anorexia, but both are intertwined with psychological, biological, and social dimensions that make them far more complex than simple willpower. The discussion then shifted to the idea of loving one's body and what true body acceptance means. For some, loving their body was not about liking its appearance, but about respecting it as something worth protecting and nurturing. One participant compared the body to a temple, explaining that to love it meant treating it with care, feeding it properly, keeping it active, and avoiding harmful behaviors. He admitted that in the past he had acted unlovingly toward his body by overeating, drinking excessively, or neglecting exercise, but he had since redefined love as the choice to care for his health. Others resonated with this distinction between loving how a body looks and loving what it can do. One woman recalled a therapist telling her to focus not on aesthetics, but on function. Her body allows her to run, to play sports, to move freely. For her, body neutrality became a powerful concept. The idea that one doesn't need to adore their body's appearance in order to value it. Neutrality meant appreciating strength, mobility, and resilience rather than obsessing over size or shape. Yet, the journey toward acceptance was not simple. Some participants admitted that despite progress, they still looked in the mirror with self-loathing or struggled with behaviors that harmed their health. For them, declaring "I love my body" felt dishonest when disordered thoughts remained. In response, others emphasized that love does not mean perfection. It can coexist with insecurity and doubt. Even choosing recovery, one participant noted, was itself an act of love. You made a choice to live. What became clear is that body love is not a fixed destination, but an evolving process. For some, it takes the form of neutrality, respecting the body for its abilities. For others, it means reframing destructive patterns into healthier habits. Above all, participants agreed that genuine self-love involves treating the body with compassion. Even when appearance does not match society's ideal. When the conversation turned to dating preferences, participants acknowledged that attraction is often influenced by body type, even if people are reluctant to admit it. Several women explained that they preferred partners who were taller, leaner, or bigger than themselves. One participant, who is tall, said she already feels too big in most situations, and therefore looks for a partner who can make her feel smaller, safer, and more feminine. For her, dating someone shorter or thinner had been triggering in the past, intensifying her insecurities and worsening her eating disorder. Others shared that fitness compatibility also mattered in relationships. One woman said she wanted a partner who enjoyed going to the gym or being active, not just for appearance, but because it allowed them to share common interests and lifestyles. Another admitted she simply found a muscular, built body more attractive, likening it to having a preference for hair color or eye color. It was just part of her natural type. Men in the group acknowledged similar biases. One confessed he tended to date thinner women, partly because he found them more attractive, but also because he worried that being with someone heavier might signal a lifestyle heading in the opposite direction of his own goals. Others admitted that while they claimed not to have strong preferences, in practice they did set boundaries, whether consciously or unconsciously, about how large or small a partner could be. At the same time, the group debated the double standard in how men and women approach attraction. Several pointed out that men often appear less selective, sometimes dating across a wider range of body types, while women tend to maintain firmer preferences. Still, others argued this perception was misleading, suggesting that men also have unspoken boundaries, but are less vocal about them. Ultimately, participants agreed that everyone has the right to personal preferences, yet they also acknowledge how these preferences are shaped by cultural beauty standards. What individuals find attractive is never entirely separate from the societal messages they have absorbed about what bodies should look like. As the dialogue progressed, participants reflected on their complicated relationships with food. Many admitted that food had long been a source of inner conflict, simultaneously a necessity, a comfort, and a trigger. For those recovering from anorexia, food was often treated as the enemy, something to be restricted and controlled. One participant described how, at her lowest point, she felt physically ill every day from starvation, but still believed she was doing the right thing because others praised her thinness. The compliments masked the reality of her declining health. On the opposite end, individuals who had struggled with obesity spoke about overeating patterns that resembled addiction. One man explained how his upbringing instilled in him the belief that food should never be wasted. Combined with his ADHD-driven curiosity to try many dishes, this led him to order more than he needed and then force himself to finish it. He eventually recognized this cycle as destructive and found healthier strategies, such as eating smaller portions with more variety or choosing restaurants that allow sampling without overindulging. The group discussed how food differs from other addictive substances like alcohol or drugs. With substances, recovery often involves total avoidance. But food cannot be cut out of life. It is essential for survival. This makes both restriction and overindulgence uniquely challenging to overcome, as every meal becomes a test of balance. For some participants, progress meant adopting a mindset of body neutrality, focusing less on how food changes appearance and more on how it fuels energy, movement, and health. Others described learning to eat without guilt, viewing meals as opportunities for nourishment rather than punishment or reward. In the end, the group recognized that healing one's relationship with food is less about strict rules and more about reshaping mindset. Food should not be a weapon of control or a source of shame, but a tool for sustaining life and supporting well-being. As the discussion deepened, participants reflected on their lifelong struggles with food and how those struggles often shape their identity. For many, food was never just nourishment. It carried emotional weight. Those recovering from anorexia recalled times when food felt like the enemy. One young woman described how she starved herself to the point of exhaustion, feeling weak and sick every day. Yet when others complimented her thin appearance, she interpreted their words as confirmation that she was doing the right thing. The praise reinforced harmful behaviors, masking the reality of her deteriorating health. On the opposite side, participants who had battled obesity likened their eating habits to addiction. One man shared how his mindset of never waste food, combined with impulsive tendencies, led him to order more than he needed. Even when full, he forced himself to finish, resulting in guilt and weight gain. He realized this pattern was destructive, and through trial and error, discovered healthier strategies, such as smaller portions, sharing meals, or visiting restaurants that encourage sampling without excess. This highlighted a key difference between food and other addictive substances. Alcohol or drugs can be avoided entirely, but food is essential for survival. As a result, both restriction and overindulgence are uniquely difficult to overcome. Every meal presents a challenge. Too little or too much becomes a battle between control and compulsion. For some, recovery meant shifting toward body neutrality, detaching food from appearance, and instead seeing it as fuel. Others described learning to eat without guilt, embracing nourishment rather than punishment. While their journeys differed, all agreed that healing required changing not only behaviors, but also mindset. In the end, food should not be a weapon of control, nor a source of shame. It should be a means to live, to move, and to find balance. Toward the close of the conversation, participants turned to the question of body love. Many admitted that they had spent years either hating or ignoring their bodies, treating them as objects to be fixed rather than companions to be cared for. One participant said, "I don't love how my body looks, but I love my body because it keeps me alive." This distinction resonated deeply. Love does not have to mean admiration of appearance, but rather appreciation for what the body does. Breathing, moving, carrying, enduring. Several describe moments of breakthrough when they redefined self-love as action. Treating the body kindly through exercise, healthy food, or rest was itself an expression of love, even if insecurities lingered. Others spoke about body neutrality, a middle ground where the goal was not constant admiration, but simple respect. "I don't need to adore my body," one said. "I just need to stop harming it." Participants also emphasized how love can coexist with imperfection. Recovery is rarely linear, and even those who considered themselves healed admitted that disordered thoughts still surfaced. Yet making the choice to live, to continue trying, was itself powerful. One speaker reminded the group, "Don't discredit yourself. You chose to live." In the final reflections, everyone agreed that extremes of anorexia and obesity are not the essence of the human story. What truly matters is finding balance, treating one's body with compassion, and striving for health over appearance. They concluded with a shared vision. Beyond size, weight, or shape, all people ultimately want the same thing: to live peacefully, to feel accepted, and to be healthy. The message was simple but profound. We are more than numbers on a scale, more than society's standards, more than shame. At the core, we just want to live and to be healthy.